You sleep for roughly a third of your life. During that time, you're horizontal, quiet, barely moving, and completely unaware of your surroundings. For a predator, that sounds like a perfect opportunity. So why doesn't it happen more often? Why doesn't a lion walk into a campsite and take the person lying closest to the edge? Why doesn't a leopard treat a sleeping hiker the same way it treats a sleeping impala? The question sounds simple, but the actual answer runs through evolutionary biology, predator psychology, human prehistory, and a few very specific cases where the rules broke down entirely. The honest answer is that it does happen. Not often, but often enough that researchers have spent serious time trying to understand the mechanics behind it. Lions in Kenya, leopards in India, brown bears across parts of Eastern Europe, there are documented cases of predators entering campsites, walking past sleeping people, and leaving without incident. The question isn't whether predators ever approach sleeping humans. The question is why it ends in an attack so rarely, given how genuinely vulnerable a sleeping person actually is. To understand that, you have to start with how predators actually make decisions. A lion isn't operating on instinct alone. It's running a constant cost-benefit calculation, and every hunt involves real risk. A Cape buffalo can kill a lion. A zebra can break a lion's jaw with a single kick. Even a wildebeest, which lions eat regularly, causes serious injuries during a struggle, often enough that it matters. Every time a predator attacks something unfamiliar, it's gambling with the one thing it absolutely cannot afford to lose, which is its own physical health. An injured predator can't hunt. A predator that can't hunt starves. That risk aversion is deeply built into predator behavior across species. Biologists call it optimal foraging theory, which describes how predators select prey based on the balance between energy return, energy cost, and risk of injury. A sleeping human in a campsite isn't obviously a safe target by that calculation. We're a strange shape, we smell unusual, we're surrounded by fire and equipment and the residual scent of multiple other humans. From the predator's perspective, the situation is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar situations are dangerous. Most large predators default to caution when they can't immediately read what they're dealing with. The data on this is surprisingly clear when you look at predator behavior in captivity versus the wild. A lion in a zoo where humans are familiar and routine will fixate on visitors with obvious predatory interest. The same lion released into an area where humans are uncommon treats humans with a kind of wariness it doesn't apply to more familiar prey. Captive animals lose the wariness that wild populations maintain. In controlled settings where feeding routines are predictable and humans are never threats, predators stop treating humans with caution. But that's the exception that proves the rule. In most of the world, where predators encounter humans infrequently and interactions often result in danger to the predator, humans register as something to approach carefully, if at all. This ties into what researchers call a predator's search image, the mental template it uses to identify prey worth pursuing. A lioness that specializes in hunting zebras has highly refined pattern recognition for zebra-specific features. Body shape, movement pattern, herd behavior, even the specific way a zebra's muscles tense before it bolts. When that lioness encounters something that doesn't match that template perfectly, the instinct to hunt doesn't automatically activate. It has to. If a predator attacked everything that moved, it would waste enormous energy on things it couldn't actually catch. So predators develop precision in what they target, and that precision becomes a liability when something doesn't fit the template. A sleeping human doesn't move like prey should move. It doesn't behave like prey should behave. The attack impulse never fully develops because the target recognition never fully activates. Size matters here in a way that surprises people. Humans are bigger than most people assume when you put us next to common prey animals. An adult human male weighs around 80 kilograms on average. That puts us in the same rough weight class as a large impala or a smaller kudu, animals that require real effort and coordination to bring down. A predator looking at a sleeping human isn't looking at something small and easily overwhelmed. It's looking at a medium to large animal of completely unknown behavior, unknown defensive capability, and uncertain risk. Now, let's talk about smell, because this is where things get genuinely interesting. Predators rely on scent far more than most people appreciate. A lion's sense of smell is roughly 7 times more sensitive than a human's, and bears operate on a level that makes that look modest. A grizzly can detect odors from more than 30 kilometers away under the right wind conditions. When a predator approaches a sleeping human, it's picking up an overwhelming mixture of signals at once: synthetic fabric, soap, food residue, fire smoke, insect repellent, the layered scent of other humans, chemical traces from water bottles and gear. That combination doesn't smell like any prey animal the predator has ever encountered. Familiar prey smells like familiar prey. A wildebeest smells like a wildebeest. A deer smells like a deer. These are scent profiles that predators spend their entire lives learning to associate with a successful hunt. A human surrounded by modern camp equipment smells like nothing in their prior experience, and that novelty alone creates hesitation. There's also the question of what predators learn to avoid over time. Animals that have had negative encounters with humans, heard gunshots, experienced traps, been chased off, carry that wariness forward, at least within a social group, and it shapes how cautious subsequent generations tend to be. The research on generational knowledge transfer in predator populations is still developing, but what exists is compelling. Predators don't just learn individually. Young animals learn from their mothers. Animals in a territory learn from others in that territory. When one leopard has a bad encounter with humans and changes its behavior as a result, that shift influences how other leopards respond to human presence. A pride of lions that has experienced human aggression becomes more cautious around humans generally. These aren't hardwired instincts that every individual rediscovers independently. They're cultural knowledge that spreads through populations over time. A region where humans have hunted predators heavily will have a predator population that's systematically more fearful of human presence than a region where human-predator encounters are rare and benign. The wariness itself becomes an inherited behavioral trait, not in the genetic sense, but in the sense of socially transmitted information that animals pick up by observation and experience sharing. Let's talk about fire, because this might be the single most important variable in the whole equation. Humans have been using fire for at least 400,000 years, and some evidence pushes that number closer to 1 million. For most of that stretch of time, sleeping near a fire wasn't a choice or a strategy. It was simply the way things were done. Not because early humans had a sophisticated understanding of predator psychology, but because fire meant warmth and cooked food and light in the dark. What it also did, without any deliberate planning, was broadcast a signal that every large predator in the area was wired to respect. No wild predator has a positive association with fire. It's not exactly a learned response. It runs deeper than that, closer to something hardwired. Lions in the Serengeti actively move away from grass fires, even when the fire is distant and tracking away from them. Leopards, which are far more bold and adaptable than lions by any measure, still give burning areas a wide berth. A campfire doesn't just light up the immediate area, it sends a signal across a significant radius that tells every predator nearby to slow down and think twice. Our ancestors stumbled into this advantage and it became one of the most effective survival tools in human history. And then there's the group factor. Humans are intensely social animals, and for the overwhelming majority of evolutionary history, sleeping meant sleeping with others. 10 people, 20, sometimes more. That changes the predator's calculation dramatically. A single sleeping human is one thing. A cluster of sleeping humans, with multiple scent sources, multiple potential threats, and the strong possibility that an attack on one wakes all of them simultaneously, is a completely different proposition. A coordinated response from even a small number of adult humans is genuinely dangerous to most predators. The specifics of how group size influences predator behavior vary by species, but the principle holds across the board. A leopard might take a solitary human, though even that's rare. A leopard approaching a group of humans sleeping within sight of one another will almost certainly retreat without any aggressive action. The mathematics of the situation shift. One human that wakes up is a problem. 3 or 4 humans that wake up simultaneously is a serious threat. The predator's brain, running those cost-benefit calculations, registers the shift and acts accordingly. Leopards are intelligent animals. Lions are intelligent animals. They can integrate information about group size, apparent alertness level, proximity of other potential threats, and the availability of alternative prey. When the numbers point to withdrawal as the safer option, withdrawal is what happens. There's research supporting this from fieldwork done with modern hunter-gatherer groups. Communities like the Hadza in Tanzania, who still sleep in relatively open conditions without permanent structures, show strikingly low rates of predation incidents during sleep hours. The combination of group size, fire, and the general sensory complexity of a camp environment creates what researchers describe as a barrier of unfamiliarity, a zone of mixed signals that predators are reluctant to cross, even when they're actively hungry and the food source is right there in front of them. But let's be honest about what the exceptions look like, because they tell you something important about how the whole system actually works. The cases where large predators do attack sleeping or stationary humans almost always share a specific cluster of features. The person is alone. They're in an area the predator uses regularly. There's no fire. And the predator is often in some compromised physical state, old, injured, or hungry enough that the normal threshold is shifted. The Tsavo man-eaters in Kenya, a pair of lions that killed somewhere between 35 and 135 construction workers while they slept during the building of the Uganda Railway, fit this pattern almost exactly. Both lions had significant dental problems that almost certainly made hunting their normal prey far more painful than usual. The Tsavo case gets cited constantly as proof that lions naturally see humans as prey, and that's not quite the right reading of it. What it actually demonstrates is that predators have thresholds, and those thresholds are conditional. Under normal circumstances, the cost of attacking a human outweighs the potential benefit. When those normal circumstances start to break down, when the predator is desperate, when the human is isolated, when protective factors are stripped away, the threshold drops. The attacks at Tsavo weren't random opportunism. They were the result of very specific conditions stacking up in the same place at the same time. The specific conditions at Tsavo are worth examining in detail because they reveal how fragile the barriers against predation actually are. The construction site had minimal fire use at night. The workers were housed in temporary structures that offered little actual protection. Most importantly, the railroad workforce was large enough to seem like abundant prey to two predators that had already discovered humans could be killed and eaten. The lions had no prior negative experience with human hunters. They hadn't learned that humans were dangerous. They discovered early in the process that a human could be taken more easily than a buffalo, and that discovery rewrote their predatory preferences entirely. This is the pattern that wildlife researchers now look for when investigating places where human predation by large animals becomes an ongoing problem. It's almost always a situation where the predator has learned through experience that the risk calculation they normally apply doesn't actually apply in that specific location. Now let's talk about leopards specifically, because they're probably the predator that posed the most realistic ongoing threat to sleeping humans across evolutionary history. Leopards are unusual among large cats in that they're genuinely comfortable operating near human settlements. They hunt in villages. They take livestock from inside enclosed compounds. There are verified cases of leopards entering homes at night through open windows. And unlike lions, which are large enough that their presence usually announces itself, a leopard can move through a space without making any sound at all. What keeps most leopard encounters from turning lethal is something researchers call investigative withdrawal. A leopard that encounters a sleeping human in its territory is far more likely to approach, smell the person carefully, and then leave than it is to attack. Part of this comes back to the same unfamiliarity problem that affects lions. Part of it is specific to how leopards hunt. They're ambush predators that depend on complete surprise and overwhelming force applied instantly, and a human who wakes up mid-attack represents a serious injury risk for an animal weighing between 30 and 90 kilograms. A leopard that gets hurt badly enough can't hunt, and that means it dies. The leopard's hunting style actually illustrates something important about why physical capability alone doesn't lead to predation. A leopard is easily capable of killing a sleeping human. It has the strength, the claws, the teeth, and the speed. Physically, it's well equipped, but capability isn't the same as likelihood. The leopard also has to make a decision, and that decision involves weighing multiple factors. Can the attack succeed without injury? Is the target definitely prey? Are there other factors that suggest danger? A sleeping human, covered in unfamiliar materials, smelling wrong, in a location full of unusual sensory information, fails most of those tests. The leopard's hunting pattern requires a very specific sequence of events. It sees prey, it stalks with absolute invisibility, it charges with overwhelming force, it kills before the prey can mount a defense. A human covered in a sleeping bag in a tent with other humans nearby doesn't fit that sequence. The moment the predator recognizes that the standard attack pattern won't apply, it stops the sequence. Most of the time, it withdraws. Bears are a different situation entirely, and it's worth separating what happens in North American backcountry from the broader pattern. Grizzly bears and black bears both have documented histories of approaching sleeping humans in wilderness settings, and the research on what drives those encounters is consistent. Food smell is the dominant factor by a wide margin. Bears that approach campsites are almost always following scent to stored food, garbage, or residue from cooking. The sleeping human is incidental. When attacks do occur near campsites, they're typically defensive. A bear that feels cornered or suddenly surprised, or in rarer cases, predatory behavior from an animal that has lost its natural caution around humans through repeated exposure. That habituation problem shows up repeatedly across wildlife research, and it's one of the more sobering findings. Animals that grow up near human settlements that associate humans with available food from garbage or unsecured supplies gradually lower their threat response. A bear or leopard that's been fed by humans directly or indirectly stops registering humans as unfamiliar and unpredictable. It starts registering them as a resource. When that shift happens, the protective uncertainty that keeps most predators cautious disappears, and the risk profile of a sleeping human changes in a very real way. There's an evolutionary angle to this that doesn't get enough attention. Humans weren't always sitting at the top of the predator-prey relationship. For most of our evolutionary history, we were hunted as regularly as we hunted. Early Homo sapiens and the species that preceded us were targeted by large cats, spotted hyenas, and crocodiles on a regular basis. The evidence is written into our own biology. We have a startle response calibrated specifically for sudden movement in low-light conditions. We sleep more lightly than most mammals our size. We wake up faster and with more immediate alertness than almost any comparably sized animal on the planet. That light sleep pattern is a direct response to long-term predation pressure. The ancestors who slept deeply and didn't wake up when something moved nearby didn't survive long enough to pass those traits forward. The ones who did survive were the light sleepers, the fast wakers, the people whose nervous systems stayed partially alert even during rest. Modern humans inherited that, and predators, working from generational experience, may have absorbed an equivalent lesson, that this particular kind of animal is unusually likely to wake up suddenly and respond with force, even when it appears completely motionless. The archaeology of early human sleeping environments supports how seriously our ancestors took predation risk. The earliest evidence of intentional shelters, rock overhangs chosen specifically for narrow approaches, cave entrances oriented to maximize visibility, structures positioned with limited angles of access, all suggest that sleeping in the open was understood as genuinely dangerous. Groups that could control their sleeping environment, limit the directions from which something could approach, and keep someone partially alert consistently produced more survivors than groups that couldn't. That selective pressure ran for a very long time. There's a concept in behavioral ecology called the landscape of fear. It was developed largely through fieldwork on prey animals in open ecosystems, and the core idea is that prey animals don't just react to predators when they're present, they organize their entire behavior around where predators might be at any given time. They eat less in areas where predators are likely to appear. They stay more vigilant in exposed locations. They modify their sleep patterns, but predators operate inside their own version of this landscape too. They avoid situations where the risk of injury or failure is elevated, even when food might technically be available there. A sleeping human surrounded by fire, unfamiliar scent, and other humans sits inside that zone of predator caution. What makes this picture complicated is that the protective factors are all relative and conditional. Group size helps, but only to a point. Fire helps, but a predator that's desperate enough might push past that hesitation. Unfamiliarity protects, but familiarity removes that protection completely. The reason sleeping humans aren't regularly hunted isn't because predators lack the physical capability, it's because the specific conditions under which attacking becomes worth attempting rarely align. Remove enough of those protective factors simultaneously, and the calculation shifts. Researchers who study human-wildlife conflict in regions like the Indian subcontinent, where tigers, leopards, and sloth bears share territory with dense human populations, describe a pattern that holds remarkably consistently across different species and different geographic areas. Attacks on sleeping humans outside of permanent structures are uncommon. Attacks on sleeping humans who are isolated in unfamiliar territory without fire spike significantly. The variables that protect people during sleep aren't mysterious. They've just been in place long enough that most people in the modern world never stop to think about what they're actually doing. There's also the question of what happens when a predator approaches a sleeping human and the person doesn't wake up. Documented cases from wildlife cameras and ranger observations show that predators, lions, leopards, hyenas, will often spend considerable time circling a sleeping person, scenting the air, and watching before withdrawing without making contact. In several of these documented cases, the animals appeared genuinely uncertain about what they were dealing with. A sleeping human is still breathing, still making slight involuntary movements, radiating body heat, producing all the biological signals of a living animal, but not behaving in any way the predator can map onto its prior experience of catchable prey. That behavioral mismatch may be one of the most underappreciated factors in this entire question. Prey animals at rest still look like the prey animals a predator knows. A sleeping wildebeest looks like a wildebeest. A sleeping impala looks like an impala. A sleeping human wrapped in synthetic material, lying flat, smelling of fire and chemicals and other humans, doesn't match anything in the predator's working model of what a successful hunt looks like. The attack never begins because the predator never fully commits to the decision that this is prey. Most of the time, that moment of hesitation is all it takes. The predator withdraws, the human never wakes up, and both animals continue on without the encounter becoming anything more than a shadow passing in the dark.